Welcome, everybody. Welcome. Thank y'all so much for joining us today. We are super excited for everybody to be here with us and just grateful that y'all would take some time out of your day to day to join us. My name is William Jackson. I am the founder and chief dreamer of Village of Wisdom. And just super excited again to be here with everybody. But before we jump in, we want to do a couple of things just to make sure we're setting the space right. Um, First, we want to extend um, a happy Ramadan, Ramadan Mubarak to all of our brothers and sisters and family of the Islamic faith, and just peace to you all, and just want to recognize you all during this important time of your faith. Um, And we're also going to take a moment just to recognize the transition of our brother Dwayne Wright, and to also, you know, speak to just the unfortunate and continued killing of Black folks in this country. But really, we want to just spend this time to just send some energy to his family and his loved ones. Given the immense loss that we're sure they are feeling due to his murder. Um, so we're just going to take a moment of silence for that now. All right. Um, Thank y'all for bearing with us as we did those two things. And excited to get into this work today. So just to give folks a little bit of a roadmap today, going to do some conversation about like what Val did with our pandemic during the pandemic, and kind of like what we were able to pivot to. Then we're going to jump into welcome and intros to introduce Amber and Dawn, and we're going to have a bit of a conversation. We got a couple of surprise updates for folks that we're excited to get into. And then we'll talk about next steps. So thank y'all for, again, being here with us. And let me go ahead and jump in. So we're going to be obviously talking about Black parent researchers today, and we're excited to do so. And so obviously Amber Majors and Dr. Dawn Henderson are going to be joining us a little bit later. Again, my name is William Jackson, and Beth Lee is also in the background right now helping us out on the development front. So when we started this, soon after the pandemic started last year, Taylor from our team decided that she was going to bring about like this idea of Wisdom Wednesday so that we could talk about our Black genius elements and the work that happens with the Black genius elements. And I'll talk a little bit more about what the Black genius elements are for those who don't know them, but basically know that that is a core framework of ours that we use to talk about how to create ecosystems and learning environments that are culturally affirming for Black children. Soon after that, in June and September of last year, Aya from our team decided that she wanted to really provide an opportunity for our community to write a letter to Black children in the Durham area and in a broader kind of in our broader community. And so we started our Black Genius Breathe video. And initially that work was really about Dear Black Genius. And if folks are kind of interested in that, you can check it out on YouTube. And then that led into actually us starting like our first community-based participatory research training. We refer to the work now as community-directed research, but essentially when we first kind of rolled this out, it was CBPR that we were doing. We ran our first CBPR, our community-based participatory research trainings in the late fall, and did our first focus groups in October of 2020. And then our parents actually disseminated that research late in December. And I lay all that stuff out just to kind of give y'all a sense of like what's been happening and what we've been doing inside of Village of Wisdom for folks who are like, well, I wonder what they did last year in the middle of the pandemic, and also to kind of give y'all a context of some of the programming that we offered. So what you can see is that we provide kind of experience for Black parents to learn about our framework and figure out how to infuse that into what they're doing with their parenting. That's what Wisdom Wednesday is about. We kind of leverage cultural organizing and arts to present like good visions and vibes for Black families and parents. And we also participated in directly making parents a part of the research. And so I'm just going to talk a little bit about like why we feel like that is so important. And then we're going to jump into this interview with Dawn and Amber. So these are our educational experts, y'all. These are Black parents who are part of, who have been a part of our organization from the very beginning. We started off really looking to work with parents to prepare them as they were preparing their children for experiencing discrimination, unfortunately, inside of schools. And we wanted these, we knew from racial socialization and racial identity research that if we encourage Black parents to affirm their children around their Blackness, that their identity would be more resilient to the discrimination events. And so it was an unfortunate solution to like an unfortunate problem, but that's what we were about. But more importantly, when we got into these conversations with Black parents, and because we structured it in a way where we were trying to listen to them, we were able to hear their expertise. And what we heard parents say over and over again is stuff like their child wasn't interested in what was happening inside of the school. They wanted to see more Black history, and their child couldn't really trust the schools that they were in, nor did the parents really do that. And what ended up happening is that we knew that Black parents had been saying this for a while, but what we also realized is that most people weren't hearing Black parents for the wisdom and the value that they were presenting. And we also knew that like when we looked at the research literature, there was a lot that was actually backing up what Black parents were saying. Not that they needed to be validated, but there was validation in the research literature. So essentially what we did is try to see Black parents' voices through the research literature that was out there. And we came up with the Black Genius Framework, which is a framework for cultural affirmation. It's a framework for how learning should look inside of classrooms and how we give Black children the best opportunities to live in and cultivate their fullest genius. And just to make this like painfully clear for folks, when we heard parents talk about interest, their child not being interested in the classroom, what we knew is that there was research from self-determination theory that says that intrinsic motivation is essential to learning. When we heard Black parents talk about Black history and the need for it in the classroom, we knew that researchers like Neblett and Howard Stevenson and Noguera and countless researchers have talked about CORD, have talked about like racial identity affirmation being essential to the healthy intellectual development and identity development of Black children. And of course, Brene Brown's work on vulnerability tells us a lot about why trust is so essential to any kind of environment, but in particular environments where you're asking people to learn, where you're asking people to love, and where you're asking people to create. And if you can't trust somebody in those environments, that research tells us that you won't be able to learn, love, and create. And so what we also knew is that we were dealing with a power differential where in schools, a lot of times parents and students are not necessarily bringing like the data, the content, the strategies, or the expertise of a particular moment. A lot of that stuff lies with schools. And so if a lot of that stuff lies with schools, then it makes it difficult for parents to engage in like a healthy and a balanced way, right? But what typically happens is that schools are actually just throwing information at parents, and not necessarily involving them in a direct conversation. And then the other problem with power is that when you like Google thought leaders and you do a Google image search on this stuff, these are the people that come up. And then there's a clearinghouse, which is the What Works Clearinghouse. And this is a place where folks look for evidence-based strategies. And these are the folks at the bottom are like a lot of the researchers who kind of appear on that What Works Clearinghouse. And the issue with that is that we know that these folks who are kind of looked at for these evidence-based strategies are not connected to Black parent wisdom. If they aren't connected to Black parent wisdom, how are they going to be responsive to the cultural needs and the culturally responsive needs and rights of Black children? And so what we thought about was like, well, how do we actually make parents researchers? Like we could very literally, like we had done initially, listen to their wisdom, but put them in the driver's seat of a research process. And so we wanted to make sure that we could actually do that. And so what does that look like? That looks like putting folks, allowing parents to really have the opportunity to create their own research questions, to be able to analyze their own data, to collect that data, and then to make conclusions and disseminate that data through their voice. And why would we want to do that? Well, we want to do that because we want Black Genius certified classrooms. We want classrooms that are leveraging the wisdom of Black parents to identify strategies, to evaluate strategies, and to validate strategies, because that's essentially what we do in research. But a lot of times folks aren't privy to that because they don't feel connected to the actual research. And so what do we know about our Black Genius framework? We can talk a little bit more about this, but we've actually done a study with more than 1,000 students. And what we found in this study of more than 1,000 students is that kids are more likely to attend school, they're less likely to be suspended, and their academic performance is higher when the 6 elements of the Black Genius framework are actually apparent in the classroom. And there's more you can find out about our Black Genius framework on our website. There's a page there where you can kind of click down and see all the elements of the Black Genius framework. And so essentially what we wanted to do was make Black parents the plug, right? Like we wanted Black parents to be connected to creating validated instructional strategies, and also to provide parent support resources. Because who more would a Black parent trust about where their child should go to school, or who is actually living into validated instructional strategies than other Black parents, right? Other parents who in the advice that they have, right? And that was essentially like what we created for Village of Wisdom initially, was like creating these spaces where Black parents could talk to each other about how they were going to navigate the racism, and their children would navigate the racism in schools. But this actually flipped the model to a better place where Black parents would be directly involved in creating more culturally affirming learning environments, not just in schools, but for all Black learners. So that is like hopefully my brief spiel, and I hope I didn't take up too much time, but really wanted to give that context before we jump into this interview. And I'm just super excited, y'all, to introduce 2 of my fellow co-workers and colleagues. They are really brilliant folks. And so let me just introduce to y'all first, Amber Majors Ladipo. Amber has authored in her short time as a researcher. She's really young in her career, already been an author on 4 peer-reviewed journal articles. She's a Robert McNair Scholar for those who are familiar with that program. She's the editor of UNC Student-Led Research Journal already. She's managed a survey validation study, the one I was telling you about that validated our Black Genius framework. In that study, we evaluated over 1,000 students, and she was the main project manager and just really key in making sure that happened. She's a proud mother and auntie, and she's a grant winner from the Institute of African American Research. Welcome, Amber. So excited to have you on here today and get into this conversation.
Yes, I'm glad to be here. I already see a lot of my people in the audience, so I'm glad to talk with y'all today.
Cool. And not only do we have Amber joining us, but we have Professor X, Dr. Dawn Henderson. She's known as Professor X to a lot of her students. Dawn has authored over 20 peer-reviewed journal articles. She's a former associate professor. She's served students at both Winston-Salem State University, and a couple of other HBCUs. I don't want to mess up the names right now. She's got 20 plus years in education. She's a former science teacher, a proud mother of 3. She's got a couple of twins. She's an RWJF award winner. So she won this research grant for doing interdisciplinary research with her community. She's a founder of our own research lab and entity called the Cheer Collaborative, and she's been awarded over $750,000 in grants over the course of her career. Dawn, we are so excited to have you. Welcome the team. Welcome to the team for Village of Wisdom. I know a lot of y'all might be your first time kind of like hearing about and knowing about Dawn. She's been with us for a few short weeks now, maybe about a month and a half. But what I will say is that it's felt like you've been here for forever. So thank you so much, Dawn, for joining us today.
Thank you so much. Will, I'm feeling some good energy up in here. So I'm super proud to be here and present. To all my beautiful people out there, greetings as well.
Cool. So we're gonna jump into this conversation real quick. And my first question to you is to you, Amber, and Dawn, both of y'all can jump in on this. Tell me about community-driven research from your perspective, right? Why is it important, and why do you feel like it's beneficial to the village of parents like yourselves, and what we want to see in schools?
You want me to go first?
You got it? Yeah.
So well, thank you so much. I believe that the very notion of community-driven research, it is, I'll call it a reacclamation. It is a proclamation of about where the research needs to be at. And ideally, I would say if we would let communities drive the research agenda, we would not have the social inequities that we see in our society. And that's basically it. That's the fundamental reason why this is important, because again, when it is driven by those who live the experience, they know the solutions to that. They know how to drive those solutions. They know how to articulate that. And more importantly, we are putting power into the hands of those who need to make change in our social institutions. So that's my view, but I'd love to hear my sister Amber.
Yeah, and I would just say, to add to that, kind of being in academia, you hear a lot of, I would call them excuses or reasons why we can't involve the community in that research. And so I think just to see that community-driven research is possible, it is feasible, and then even thinking about, with research, there are always implications. So really putting parents in that seat to say, well, these are the outcomes. And then based on our interpretation of the data that we collected, this is what we recommend. So I think that's why it's so important, why it really hits home for me, is that you're giving that authority back to those parents to say, this is what you should do. So, yeah.
Absolutely. And Dawn, you want to talk a little bit about why you prefer the term community-driven research as opposed to community-based participatory research?
Yes, I'm gonna drop some jewels on you. Okay. All right. So in truth, the idea of CBPR comes out of higher education, comes out of academia. And we know that participatory research, these terms that people have used, probably generated around the 1960s. Some people even say around the 1940s when you think about Kurt Lewin and folks like that, right? So I want to say that first, the naming of it began not in community. It began with higher education institutions, folks in higher education institutions. The other thing about the interrogation of community-based is the idea that institutions immerse themselves into communities and they base themselves within those communities. And I would like to say, to some extent, they extract the intellectual wisdom, the intellectual knowledge, the lived experiences from those communities and put that work, right? They'll put that work in publications, that are supporting promotion, their own, level of status, their degree of notoriety. And so what happens is that as researchers are kind of pretty much gaining that notoriety off of the lived experience of community, it's very rarely that community gains the capital from that. And so when I say community driven, I am interrogating the CVPR concept that is used, because I'm saying that our communities, those people who are close to the lived experience, who are breathing the experience, they need to drive the research agenda. They need to be formulating the research portfolios of foundations and agencies, generating the research questions, being a part of the solutions that they see that are beneficial to their community. So I'm very clear in saying community-driven versus community-based research, participatory research.
Thank you. I wanted to make sure I gave you that space to break down the CDR for the folks in the back.
Sure.
Amber, could you help us connect the dots between this community-driven research and your vision for the Clearinghouse?
Of course. So as I mentioned with like recommendations, right, and thinking about the practice space, you can tend to hear buzzwords like, let's make sure we're doing evidence-based practice, or let's make sure we're using evidence-based practices. And those are important, right? Those tend to come from research. And so when thinking about the Clearinghouse, what a Clearinghouse is pretty much just a database of strategies that can be like policy, implementation, practices, programs that can be used. And in this particular case, we're looking at mostly culturally affirming learning spaces, so learning environments. And so thinking about community-driven research, it really looks at what are the ways that parents are validating research or saying, well, these are the conditions under which we think that you should use this practice that came out of whoever's research. So as Will mentioned earlier, when you look in these clearinghouses, so for instance, the What Works Clearinghouse, you tend to see that the practices that go in these clearinghouses came from mostly white male researchers. And you tend to see that the people who validated those practices or strategies also tend to be white. And so what we're trying to do here is think about what does it actually look like for parents who have, yes, the lived experience of having been a Black student in the US education system, right? And then they're the parents of Black students in the US education system. And then they're also, and I know Will might talk about this later, they're gonna go through a process where they really interrogate what does it mean to have a culturally affirming learning environment? And they're going to get this whole rights experience from my sister, Taylor Weber Fields. And so through those experiences, those parents will be prepared to really look at, okay, what are our standards that we're going to hold these practices to? If we're saying that parents or practitioners can go in this database and pull out practices to use, then what do we want to recommend about those practices? Which practices do we believe will actually create culturally affirming environments? And if there's a practice that has the potential to, what do we want people who are going to go in this database and use it to know about these practices? So with that, it's really positioning the parent as the translator with the Clearinghouse. So the research has been done, for instance, right? Like Village of Wisdom is developing a toolkit currently And that's one practice that is going to be validated. So after all that research has been done is to develop that toolkit and then to evaluate that toolkit, we're going to have Black parents come in to say, now, what do we actually want to tell those who would put these toolkits and these practices into play about how to use it? And so I think that's the part that really excites me, is parents actually being able to go through that process of developing that process that would then become iterative, because I think it's really going to change this climate where we just pull out evidence-based practices from these huge databases and we just use them because someone said so, and that authority or that someone tends to be white male researchers. So that's the Clearinghouse idea, and that's what gets me really excited about this process.
Thank you, Amber. Thank you so much for sharing that. Thank you for your vision. Thank you so much for just being a team member of Val, y'all. Like, Amber's been working with us pretty much since the beginning. She's a big part of the reason why there is a Black Genius Framework tool out there. And so when she came to me and the team at the beginning of last year with this Clearinghouse idea, we were just super excited to try to make that vision a reality, and excited about her leading that work. One quick thing I'll just say is that if y'all have questions that you'd like for us to kind of address, please feel free to drop those in the chat. We'll get to them in a second. I got a couple more questions for folks. Dawn, we talk a lot about rigor in the research space. People, when we talk about evidence-based practices, what people typically are referring to is this idea of a randomized controlled trial. And that is to say that, like, I tested it with one group of people and I tested it versus another group of people who didn't get anything. And it is lifted up as like a gold standard. But what I'm curious about is like, what are some of the other ways we can think about rigor, right? And how does that tie into like your vision for how you want to prepare Black parents to be researchers and push against this notion of who gets to do research and where research happens?
Thank you so much, Will, for that question. So I definitely believe we always have to interrogate any words that come out of institutions that are not created by us and for us. So in this notion of rigor, the ways in which I see rigor, the ways in which I reclaim that term, we start off with what I call like an ethics of care. Again, another shout out to Taylor about a culture of care, because we acknowledge that anybody who steps into the claim or the idea of doing research, that they, particularly research that has a justice focus, that is about equity, that they themselves have to be willing to begin to unpack, right? And acknowledge the ways that they have been infected by systems of racism. We acknowledge that requires a culture of care, or a culture of healing and taking care of ourselves while we're also doing this work with participants. So in the process of preparing our parents, we do that, right? We recognize that, we hold space for that, as well as not teaching, but guiding them about how do we take care of this concept of participants and the ways in which we engage with participants in our research. I do want to acknowledge that another critical part of our work is embedded in what I call decolonized methodologies, right? In indigenous methodologies, African ways of knowing. So we know the value of stories and the value of collecting those stories, also the value of checking those stories. So again, we acknowledge that, yes, we use more qualitative approaches, but within that qualitative lens, we acknowledge our position, right? We acknowledge how we have been influenced in terms of understanding our interpretation of that reality. Some will call it positionality. In that process, again, when we're talking about the work that we've done with parent researchers were critical, again, in the meaning-making process, right? So we knew that we had to bring these transcripts, do the coding, go through this iterative, this what I call this open coding process, right, to develop these concepts and themes. We also knew that we had to check back with our parent researchers and say, how does this reflect your own lived experience? How does this reflect what you hear from your community and different aspects of that? And some will call that member checking. This idea of ensuring trustworthiness for those people who are in that research world. So for us, rigor involves all of that, right? And more importantly, as you all stated, it involves the validation of Black parents, because the Black parents are the ones that are saying, this is truth and this is our truth. And once that stamp of approval goes on, it is rigorous in my book, Will.
Thank you, Don. I got one more question, then we're gonna jump to the Q&A. And this is for you, Amber. Don just talked a lot about positionality, right? And this idea of I'm a parent, I have a certain position, right? In how I see how a phenomenon or how a set of things is unfolding. And I think a big part of this work is like looking at this idea of, oh, the researcher matters, right? And so I'm just wondering if you could talk a little bit about how you've seen the positionality of a researcher, in particular, the Black mama researchers that we have, influence the nuance of what they were able to find during this our initial kind of study.
Yes, I love talking about nuance. So when thinking about positionality in practice, right, when you're going through the process where one, you're even collecting the data, the questions that you field beyond like, oh, I have my set of questions, you might field questions or you might ask questions or probe based on the connections that you have to what someone who you're collecting data from has already said, right? So that allows you to get more rich data because you're just able to read, for instance, if it's a focus group, you're able to read that room. And then I would say too, it also comes in the interpretation of the data. You're able to draw conclusions from the data that someone who doesn't have that particular lived experience or shared experience with the participants is going to be able to different from what that person is going to be able to discern from the data. And then I would say another way that I've seen positionality play out is just when we're having like our sessions, like we actually still have sessions where we're reinterpreting the data with the Black parent researchers. And then there are a lot of aha moments. And then it's like, oh, I remember I had this one experience with my child in school where this happened. And then they're able to draw those different connections that someone might not be able to conclude if they didn't have a similar experience or if they didn't live amongst others who have that shared experience. So I think that's another, I think that's the beauty of positionality. And I think it's something else that's great about it is that all of our parent researchers, although they have shared experiences, they have different experiences. So I think that's what just makes it exciting. Like, oh, I never thought about that. And yeah, so when we're just like in our space and zoning and talking about our different interpretations, you really see the importance of thinking about positionality. So yeah.
Thank you so much, Amber, for breaking that down. So we got 5 questions that we're going to try to get through pretty quickly. We're going to need to transition around 12:45, 12:47 or so, just so we can get to everything in our agenda. The first question is, I would love to hear about the experiences of trust gaining and getting parents, caregivers, families involved in this process and project. Anybody want to take that on?
I wonder if, Amber, you want to talk a little bit more since you have that longer history and I can piggyback on you.
Yeah. So I'll start. So sometimes in Val, it's been the case, right, where we have parents who we've been working with for a while. So we've long since established that trust, like long before we wanted to get them involved with this research process. But I would say taking into consideration also the history of just, I would say, valid mistrust of research. Part of it is, as Dawn mentioned, and I'm hoping she'll build on this, like this ethics of care, or this culture of care, recognizing and affirming and not dismissing that there's a valid mistrust of pretty much research and the way it has been conducted on our people, or purportedly for our people. And so what I would say is, for parents who we've probably engaged more recently, there's more of this ethics of trust and this trust building. I would say one way that parents trust us is because we're a Black organization and they share our principles. Not to say that that's enough, right? But I really think that that's one of those sort of entry points for trust. And then I think something else that is really essential to building trust is actually affirming, and I would say disproving to people that you have their best interest at heart. But I'll let Dawn kind of add to that based on her perspective of what it's like to establish trust.
Yes, thank you so much, Amber. So again, I would like to argue that trust comes from people knowing that they matter. And when you are talking about existing in a society that has tried to, I would say, try to erase, try to make you invisible, try to push you out, as we say, into the margins, that whenever there is space that allows you to recognize that you matter, that your voice matters, that your ideas matter. So the moment you recognize, like, everything that I'm saying, someone is listening to that. And not only are they listening to that, I see it. I see it manifest, as Will said earlier. I see my words manifest as the Black Genius Framework. As Black researchers, I saw my words come into the dissemination as I was talking to education leaders. I see it in the post on those tweets, right? So the idea of mattering matters. And after that, when you talk about when you feel that, that's when trust begins to develop, because you trust that this person is going to listen, and they're going to hear you, and they are going to respond to you. So the moment those things start to happen, and as you express your ideas, you are affirmed. Someone saying, yes, that's Black genius. That's Black genius. When those things start to affirm you, I like to say that the personal power becomes ignited, right? You feel confident. You feel like you can accomplish something, that you can take this to anyone. I can take this in front of an educator, in front of a school district, in front of a councilman, and speak, because I've been affirmed, I've been ignited, and all of those things. So those are critical. Those are critical when you're talking about building a culture of care for community and for parent researchers.
You took us to church on that one. I'm need my fan over here. Beth, you gonna come on and drop another question on us? This might be our last one, y'all.
Okay. All right. I think this is a two-parter, if you will.
Okay.
So I think you'll answer two questions. The first part is, are there specific ways that people in academia might support this work and disrupt systems along with you all? And that follow-up is, if a student or researcher is considering referencing or using approaches like what Village of Wisdom is employing, how would you like for the work to be cited?
Good questions. Good questions. I'll take a hack at the first one. I think when we talk about how institutions can kind of support work like this, I think part of it is that how is the institution going to build a reward system that reflects well or represents this type of approach? For folks who don't participate in academia, are not as familiar with academia, you might not know that there's a tenure track process, and that tenure track process is largely driven by how many research papers you can pump out. And the first thing that Dawn told me when I called her and I said, "Hey, Dawn, we need some help with this CBPR work," and she was like, "Will, that's long work." And Amber and Taylor will tell you this. Like, I called them, I was like, "Yo, I'm trying to get this CBPR process done." It was like June, y'all. I was like, I'm trying to be done by like October. And they were like, "Will, you are crazy. Like, this is not going to happen." And Dawn was like, "That's not how this works. That's not how any of this works, Will." And the reason why I bring up the length of time for this is just to say that, like, because it takes a long time, what it means is it takes longer to put that research out there, right? Like, and so you can't grade folks who are doing research out in a community on the same scale as people who get to do research inside of a lab and do it with the students who are who are basically in the lab with them or in their own school. Like, those two people can't be graded on the same things. And when they are, what it makes it difficult is for those folks to want to stay engaged in community-based research. I guess what I'm saying is that I always believe in looking at the system first as opposed to the people who are in the system. And so we really got to reevaluate how we structure academia and how research is rewarded, because if not, then we're not going to get there. And the other thing is, I'll just bring in the rigor conversation again, right? Like, we think about this stuff as rigorous because we did like it with 20,000 students. But the question I love asking is, like, is your research rigorous enough to live up to the dreams of Black parents? Right? Like, those are the ways that I want us to start to reimagine what rigor looks like. And I think when we start to push that conversation, then we can kind of get to a better place. And I'll stop talking. I'm gonna talk too long. Yeah, I got worked up.
I think you had the citation question.
Yep.
So the citation, actually, in the Keep Dreaming report, we'll drop the link in there for folks. There is a citation or a reference in there. You can kind of reference that in terms of a type of approach. And you're also giving us some work to do to think about maybe a methodological paper to drop for folks to reference.
Yes, I know, and in the interest of time, but if possible, one of the questions, it seems to be a recurring theme in several of the questions we won't be able to get to, but it is, how can communities start this conversation where they are locally? Is it, the school level, district level? How can they begin the conversation to discuss inequities and even employing the wisdom of Black parents?
So Beth, the question always comes with, how can they begin? I think it's begin the conversation. Begin the conversation with a high sense of humility. Begin the conversation. I saw my sister Megan from Duke with a willingness to move back so that others can move forward, and inviting space for folks who tend to, again, not necessarily heard often, allowing them to be heard. So that's kind of what I think the conversation should begin with. And then, of course, there are important aspects to how do we lead that conversation? How do we guide that conversation to really start understanding, like, levers around where inequities exist? Oftentimes people want to keep looking at data, but we know. We don't no longer need to look at inequities, and we already have awareness of that exists. What we need to be doing is how to think about action plans around those inequities. So that's my thought. I'll invite my colleagues to step in as well.
No, yeah, I just wanted to add really quickly. I think too, talking about the implications of not doing so with folks. And so, for instance, if we see that there's a clearinghouse that has discipline strategies in it, the What Works Clearinghouse, and it is aracial, acultural, says nothing about disproportionate discipline referrals, does not address any of the systemic issues that result in that, then when you look at it that way and begin to have those discussions, I think that can kind of like push the urgency on doing so. In terms of having a more community-driven approach, but that's just like my perspective. People tend to respond to like, these are the implications of not doing so. But yeah.
I will pass this on. I appreciate that for you all. This question, the Q&A. If we didn't get to your question today, I will invite you to not only contact us via our website, but we'll, knowing Will, he'll try and get to as many as he can in some way, shape, or form, dropping especially documents into the chat for you all to help answer those questions. And I will also just chime in and say, in regards to the conversation, don't stop the conversation. We can get tired, but pass the baton. Things may stay surface level, pass it to the next person. Just continue and continue and continue until you do get those results.
Thank you so much, Beth. Thank you, Dawn. Thank you, Amber, so much for joining me in this conversation. Just super appreciative and grateful for both of y'all and having y'all on the team. If folks have been following along and seeing a lot of our Twitter and Instagram and social media activity, it is due in large part to the Nzinga level power and strength that Dawn and Amber have both brought to this, and also big shout outs to Taylor Weber Fields from our team. And Rabiatu Berry, who was also an essential team member in making sure that this stuff happens. So I'm gonna push us to the next part to just give y'all, if any of y'all caught like our little emails, I said we got a couple of surprise announcements. So I wanna make sure I make good on the surprise announcements, and kind of in the vein of talking about Taylor and giving her some big ups. I know she would be real mad at me if I let y'all get out of here without telling y'all about the Black Genius Breakthrough Experience. Y'all need to sign up for this. I am telling you right now, you want to be a part of it. It is where you will find your tribe. We're looking for 50 Black parent, Black caregiver, Black Genius protectors to join us. You can sign up and learn more about this event at BG Breakthrough, spell like how you would think we would spell it, .eventbrite.com. You can also just check us out on Instagram or Twitter. If you kind of scroll back through some of our tweets or our Instagram posts, you'll be able to find that link. It's also in our link tree on Instagram and Twitter, so y'all can find more information there. Also, y'all heard it here first, because you could have seen the BG Breakthrough on social media maybe a week ago if you were paying attention. But the manifesto event is happening. I'm not going to talk about this. I'm going to let Dawn say a quick few words about when it is, what's happening. Tell us what's going on, Dawn.
Yes, thank you, Will. So all and everybody, we want to invite you to our Dream Manifesto event. So this is an event where we will feature our beautiful Black parent researchers. And what they're going to release is what we call the Dream Mandments. So the Dream Mandments are pretty much, again, actions, right? Actions that need to take place when we're talking about building culturally affirming learning environment. So we are calling on people in our community. We are calling on protectors of Black genius to come to this event, be present, and be ready to learn together, to share together, and be willing to get ready to do some action together. So I'm gonna put that link also in the chat, and I'm excited about this, lifting this up.
And I'll just go back one real quick. If there's Black parents that are on the line right now and you're wondering like, well, how do I become a Black parent researcher? Your first step is going to the BG Breakthrough event. So you want to be a Black parent researcher and you down for that, or you think you know somebody who wants to be a Black parent researcher, this is the portal, all right? Literally, it's the portal to get into this work and kind of begin that journey. And like Dawn said, if you want to hear from the Black parent researchers themselves, that this is going to be the time at the Dream Manifesto event. Y'all are going to be in for a treat. They come with it. If you thought we came with it, you ain't seen nothing until you seen these Black parent mama researchers. All right. So the other announcement is that this is my baby girl Salone. And I think she probably knew this when she came out, that they was probably gonna try to replace her picture. We was gonna try to replace her picture. And what I mean by that is me and Madupe, my wife, my partner, we're expecting a child early in May. So if you hit my email inbox up in May and I don't respond, well, you'll know, because you're gonna get that autoresponder, because I'm gonna be out for a little bit. But that was just like a cute kind of announcement to get everybody going and let folks know what's happening. The other thing is that, you know, I just want to again kind of shout out the educational experts out there, like these Black parents. This is like a group of Black parents who were there at the beginning with us, and just kind of lift up the fact that, like, if we don't do anything else, y'all, I just want to convey to y'all that if we're doing work in communities, if we're doing work in schools, then we have to invite both Black parents and Black students into these conversations to make sure that we're being culturally responsive. Chris Emdin talks about co-generative dialogue, and he drives this point home really well, that if you want to be culturally responsive to folks, then you have to actually get to know those people. You can't be culturally responsive without actually having conversations with the people that you're trying to be culturally responsive to. And I just want to shout out specifically Denise, Regina, Joy, Nadia, and Courtney. These are our 5 inaugural Black parent researchers. These Black mamas held it down for us. They were the inaugural group. They kind of went through all the bumps and turns of trying to do a program initially. And we are just forever grateful for y'all. I know a couple of them are in here today. So from my heart to y'all, like, I just want to say thank y'all so much. And if you've ever done anything with Village of Wisdom, you know, we don't just do words. We put money in folks' hands because we can never pay somebody what their value is as a human, but we can honor and recognize people's intellectual contributions to the work that they're doing. So they were the ones, again, who came up with these research questions. They were the ones, again, who made sense of the data. They were the ones, again, who kind of came to the conclusions that y'all will learn more about during the Dream Manifesto event. And because of that, we compensated them. And for some people, and you can kind of see what impact that had on them here. Like, you probably don't have time to like look at each one of these, but you can see Denise talking about, when I tell you my Village of Wisdom family is moving mountains and protecting Black genes by any means necessary, which AKA that is Denise's call and tagline is by any means necessary. This is just the impact that it had on them, right, y'all? Like, this is when they were sharing this stuff on Facebook and sharing kind of the initial findings. So I just wanted to kind of lift up that experience, and also just say, like, just grateful for their investment in the work that this has meant. And so when we talk about that, we quite literally mean that we're going to be probably involving 10 more parents over the course of the next 12 to 18 months in this research work, right? And we compensate right around like the $30 per hour range. They're going to spend about 50 hours with us over the course of the year. And so that turns out to be about 1.5K that we're putting in the hands of Black parents for doing this work, right? So one, that is honoring their contribution, but 2, it is helping us like do other important things like in the economic space, right? Like, we know that there's an immense wealth gap in this country. We know that Black folks deserve all of this money and more. And so Village of Wisdom is trying to do our part to make sure that that happens. And so that's also a part of our ask to y'all today, right? Like, it's to support the next cohort of Black parent researchers. And our goal is for $15,000. We're not saying, oh, we're going to get that on this call today, but we're just kind of laying it out there for y'all, for us to honor the intellectual contributions. And if you want to be a part of honoring the intellectual contributions of these Black parent researchers, you can do that. There's a couple of different suggestions on here. You could become a monthly donor and make a couple of dollars donations every month. You can mail in a donation if you like to keep it old school, or if you're gonna send a big check, we would rather you avoid those processing fees. So just send it to your peoples at that address up there. Or if you work at a company, does a company match? A lot of folks work at some of these big Fortune 500 companies and they have matching programs. We would love for you all to select Village of Wisdom and think about making that contribution. I am again just super grateful for everybody and for y'all all joining us today. Um, and just want to really say thank y'all and spending time for us. We hope that y'all have a great rest of your day. We hope that you find peace and joy, and we just extend a lot of love and happiness to folks. And we hope that y'all will join us next time, the next time we have something like this. Peace, y'all.